Hello. Welcome to the virtual event honoring the renowned Emil J Freireich, presented by the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Thank you for joining us today to remember Dr. Freireich and celebrate his achievements as one of the world's giants of modern medicine. We have a wonderful lineup planned to honor Dr. Freireich's extraordinary career and invaluable contributions to the field of oncology. We are fortunate to have with us today the president of MD Anderson, Dr. Peter Pisters, along with a panel of Dr. Freireich's esteemed colleagues. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Pisters to share some remarks.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Peter Pisters, and I'm honored to serve as president of MD Anderson. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to honor the legacy of Dr. Emil Freireich, a trailblazing oncologist who developed groundbreaking therapies for childhood leukemia. Dr. Freireich advanced creative ideas with a fearlessness that made him the perfect advocate for children with leukemia. His fierce determination drove him to break medical barriers and led to his later recognition as a founding father of modern clinical cancer research. Thanks to discoveries made decades ago by Dr. Freireich, today's 5-year survival rate for children with acute lymphocytic leukemia, the most common childhood leukemia, is about 90% overall. For more than 60 years, Dr. Freireich pushed the boundaries of modern medicine to develop therapies that would save many young lives. Dr. Freireich's contributions are a highlight in the history of cancer research at MD Anderson. His career here spanned 5 decades, and he passed away peacefully on February 1st, 2021, at the age of 93. His legacy, however, will live on forever. I was so fortunate to witness firsthand the wisdom, the passion, and the exacting standards that Dr. Freireich modeled for all of us to emulate in our ongoing efforts to end cancer. Please join me in watching this video honoring the life and legacy of Emil J Freireich.
At the memorial service for Emil J Freireich, held on March 6, 2021, his son Tom shared one of Freireich's rules: never plan for failure. Freireich translated this rule into the groundbreaking work he conducted on behalf of cancer patients everywhere. Freireich was born in 1927, right before the Great Depression. His mother used the letter J on his birth certificate, but it was not an abbreviation for an actual name. No period was to be used. The son of Hungarian immigrants, he grew up poor in inner-city Chicago. His father died when Freireich was just 2 years old, an event he said played a critical role in shaping his formative years and ultimately his tenacity in the face of adversity. Inspired by a physics teacher, Freireich attended the University of Illinois in Champaign at the age of 16. He waited tables to help pay for his undergraduate degree. Freireich earned his medical degree in 1949 from the University of Illinois College of Medicine, graduating 6th in his class. He was just 22 at the time. He completed an internship and residency in internal medicine at 2 Chicago hospitals and later accepted a fellowship in hematology at Massachusetts Memorial Hospital in Boston. It was here that he met his wife, Haroldine Lee Cunningham, a nurse who fondly referred to him as Jay.
But Deanie Freireich belongs here next to me. We're partners in life. We've created a home and a family and a career together, and I must say she deserves as much credit as I do.
Freireich accepted a position with the National Cancer Institute in 1955, where he was assigned to the Pediatric Leukemia Ward. Freireich said, "Leukemia at the time was a horrible illness, a death sentence. Most children lived only 8 weeks after being diagnosed. 99% died within a year." Leukemia patients frequently bled to death, and Freireich believed that his patient's bleeding was caused by insufficient platelets, which are necessary for clotting. He turned to research focused on atomic bomb victims from World War II. Medical research revealed that platelets of these victims had been wiped out by radiation and that the victims had died of hemorrhaging. Freireich knew he was onto something, but many dismissed his idea at the time. He used his own blood and blood from leukemia patients for blood transfusions. Their bleeding stopped just as he thought it would, a finding that led to the development of the first continuous flow blood cell separators, for which he holds the patent. With his discovery, bleeding as a cause of death in childhood leukemia patients was essentially eliminated. But Freireich didn't stop there. He was determined to find a cure for childhood leukemia. In a daring move, he developed a treatment called early intensification, which is a combination of 4 chemotherapy drugs, an idea that was discredited by prominent researchers at the time. Freireich pressed on, making a case that this treatment was better than the inevitable death. The treatment worked, and kids began surviving. This strategy is still in use today, and the cure rate for childhood leukemia is about 90% overall. Freireich made these groundbreaking discoveries before he stepped foot on MD Anderson's campus. In 1965, he was recruited to MD Anderson to launch a chemotherapy program. Although hesitant at first, he eventually made the move to Houston, and under MD Anderson's first president, R. Lee Clark, Freireich was able to leverage his discoveries. He played a pivotal role in shaping MD Anderson into what it is today. Freireich, along with another doctor, Emil Tom Fry III, formed the Department of Developmental Therapeutics and hired brilliant young scientists who developed drug combinations that cured various cancers based on the same methods used to treat childhood leukemia. He led the leukemia research program at MD Anderson for decades, training the next generation of cancer physicians and scientists, instilling in them his same commitment and dedication to conquering cancer. He was a faculty member at MD Anderson from 1965 to 2015. In total, his career spanned more than 60 years, all of them devoted to saving young lives. Freireich contributed to more than 600 scientific papers and more than 100 books. He earned numerous accolades for his life-saving work, and MD Anderson created the Emil J Freireich Award for Excellence in Education in his honor. In the face of opposition, Freireich proved that he was able to accomplish whatever he set his mind to, making him a true giant in the field of modern medicine. On February 1st, 2021, Dr. Freireich passed away.
Freireich was truly the epitome of I am MD Anderson, and we were lucky to be observers and participants in Freireich's life, a life which was wonderfully led.
To the greatest dad, doctor, comrade, partner, friend, greatest person that I've ever known, leader, champion, hero, innovator, list is long. To you, Dr. Freireich, we love you.
Dr. Freireich's beloved wife, Haroldine Deanie Freireich, passed away on May 21st, 2021. They are both survived by their 4 children. They will be remembered by 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, among many of Dr. Freireich's patients who had the chance to grow up cancer-free because of his remarkable contributions to cancer research.
For me, the big reward is to see children who were treated for acute lymphoblastic leukemia who have come to my department as trainees to learn how to treat other children with cancer. That's a real gratifying sensation.
When I look back at my time, my career at MD Anderson, which was short compared to Dr. Freireich's, but when I look back and think about the time that I worked with him, he taught me that family was very important. He would always talk about his family. He really loved his wife and his family and all his kids, all his grandkids. He also taught me how to think and how to think critically, and also to not be afraid of somebody saying, that can't be done, we can't do that, that won't happen. He was always thinking of how to improve the lives of people and therefore contribute to humanity in a great way. I feel so honored to have been not only working in the same department with him, but be working alongside with him and being his PA. You know, I was Dr. Freireich's PA. And it's just a huge honor. The memories live on, and it is actually something that I will never forget because it impacted my life in such a great way.
One of my dad's philosophies in life was to never give up and to never quit, especially when it came to cancer and to illness. When my father was ill at MD Anderson, his beloved MD Anderson, we never gave up. We fought for him until the bitter end. And I know that that's what made him such a wonderful and remarkable doctor. He always looked for another way to save them, to give them life.
My favorite story with my dad is we were in Washington. Ronald Reagan was going to shake his hand. And the night before, I'm in the hotel room. My mom and I are listening to Dad talk about a political issue going on in the country and how Ronald Reagan should handle it. And we just knew Dad was going to say something. And sure enough, right in the middle of a presentation of this beautiful award, my dad starts talking about how Ronald Reagan could change this one thing that would make a significant difference in political action. And we just knew that it wasn't about his award, but what he could continue to do to improve and do things that were more monumental or improve something that had to do with medicine that wasn't being done at that time.
Thank you so much to all the faculty and the staff of MD Anderson for joining in and sharing all the wonderful stories about my father and contributing to his legacy so that hopefully he will live on forever and ever. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Christopher Flowers, professor and chair of the Department of Lymphoma Myeloma and interim division head of cancer medicine at the UT MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I'm pleased to celebrate the life of Emil J Freireich today with an august panel of colleagues. Dr. Freireich is a luminary clinician and scientist and expert in the field of hematologic malignancies and cancer medicine, and really led the field in a number of key areas. And I have a group of folks here to celebrate his life, to discuss many of the ways that he's impacted the field of medicine. First is Dr. Hagop Kantarjan, professor and chair of the Department of Leukemia. Next is Dr. Varsha Gandhi, who is professor and interim chair of the Department of Experimental Therapeutics. Following her will be Dr. Adan Rios, who's professor of oncology at the UT Health McGovern Medical School. And also joining us is Dr. Vivek Savaya, who is an associate professor in the Department of Investigational Cancer Therapeutics. Let's start things off with Dr. Kantarjan. Dr. Kantarjan, you've known Dr. Freireich over a number of decades, and he's really been a key leader in the field and made a number of seminal contributions. Can you describe what some of those contributions have been that have really changed the practice of medicine?
Thank you, Chris, for the opportunity of this conversation about Freireich, whom many of us in the field consider as a legend in cancer research. So with your permission, I'm going to introduce him to define who he was to many of us, what defined him as a cancer researcher, and then the impact of his research on cancer care. So as many of us know, he was a trailblazing scientist and in fact is considered the founding father of modern cancer research and care. But to many of us who knew him intimately, and I got to know Freireich in 1978 when I came here as a medical student, to many of us, he was much more than this cancer researcher. He was our idol and hero. He was an inspirational daily role model, and he was a mentor, and he often acted as a third parent to many of us. It is very important to define the three characteristics that made Freireich who he was. First, he was, of course, a genius. That's recognized. But he had two features that made him separate from all other cancer researchers. He was an eternal optimist. He had eternal optimism, and he also had unlimited audacity. So let me discuss first the optimism of Freireich. When other people saw terminal situations, Freireich saw an opportunity to develop something to help these patients and cure them. To give you the first example, when he started seeing those children at the NCI in 1955 who were dying within 4 to 6 weeks of bleeding and their leukemia, Freireich rejected the notion that these patients should be let to die with dignity and without harm. So when people told him, you know, the first dogma in medicine is primum non nocere, first do no harm. Freireich rejected that notion, and he created his own creed by saying, and this was what people refer to as Freireich's law number 5. He said, first do no harm fails to do the possible and the necessary. The physician's admonition should be clearly do what can be possibly done, and perhaps more important, do which is necessary. So instead of accepting the dogma of first do no harm, he changed it to first do no net harm, because every time we interfere in cancer care and research, there's some form of potential harm against which the benefit has to be considered. The second notion is his audacity to defy established dogmas. So at the dawn of cancer research, people believed that cancer cannot be cured with medicine. You could either take it out with surgery or you could irradiate it. But in contrast to choriocarcinoma that people felt was an allogenic tumor and could be cured with methotrexate, people felt that syngeneic tumors, the tumors arising from the host, could not be cured with medicine. And this is where he started his first discoveries in acute lymphocytic leukemia, where he started treating these children with 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4 drugs, what is now known as the POMP or the VAMP regimen. And this is where he first established for the first time that cancers could be cured with medical therapies and that you needed combination chemotherapy to cure them. So these were the two very important things that defined Freireich's characteristics, in addition to him being a genius.
That second issue sounds like something that really changed the field of cancer medicine.
Absolutely. So, and this is where we come to Freireich's discoveries and how important they were to the field of cancer care and research. So when he came to the NCI, the first discovery that he made was children were bleeding, but the cause of the bleeding was low platelets. And this was in contrast to the dogma where people believed that the bleeding was related to anticoagulants that prevented platelets from causing the clotting. So he established the causal association. Then he developed the first pheresis machines to separate the platelets, gave the platelets to these children, and he stopped the bleeding. But they were still dying from the leukemia. So he used that combination chemotherapy that cures today 80 to 90% of children with cancer. Now, these were the two discoveries that people highlight as the important ones in Freireich's career. But I think his true discovery started in 1965 when he came to MD Anderson. This is when he created the Department of Developmental Therapeutics. He attracted hundreds of like-minded researchers, and they started developing those combinations, what is known as the MOP therapy for Hodgkin's disease, the CHOP chemotherapy for lymphoma, the FAC chemotherapy for breast cancer, and so on and so forth. So the first discovery of the combination chemotherapy is what opened the field widely to combination chemotherapy across solid tumors. Now, the other thing about the pheresis machine is people think it's a simple platelet separator, but in fact, after Dr. McCready discovered that stem cells were circulating in the blood, people used those pheresis machines to collect the stem cells to do the autologous and allogeneic stem cell transplantation. Now, in addition to these discoveries, when he came to MD Anderson, Freireich collaborated with Dr. Bodie when they found that low neutrophil counts were causing infections. And this, other than bleeding, were the two major causes of death in patients with cancers. So after they made that discovery, they developed what is now referred to as empiric antibiotic therapy. So when you saw patients with fever and neutropenia, instead of waiting for positive blood cultures, they started treating them with antibiotics, with empiric antibiotic therapy. So these two things, the platelet transfusion and the empiric antibiotic therapy, are the two things that allowed us today to treat, to use intensive chemotherapy across all these hematologic malignancies and the solid tumors, and actually to establish the field of allogeneic stem cell transplantation, which could not have been done safely without the use of platelets and without the use of empiric antibiotic therapy.
These are really revolutionary discoveries that affect all cancer patients. How often would you say that we're using platelet transfusions or antibiotics in cancer patients today? Is that something that is still part of our everyday practice, day in and day out, and probably will be for the rest of history? One of the things that you mentioned was the role of developmental therapeutics. And we have two panelists that were directly impacted by that. First, I'll turn to Dr. Varsha Gandhi, who is the interim head of the group that still runs that work today in experimental therapeutics. Dr. Gandhi, can you describe the ways that Dr. Freireich impacted your career and career development?
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you, Dr. Flowers. And not only I will describe that, but I will also talk about this department. So currently the name is Experimental Therapeutics, but the genesis of this department was due to the far-reaching vision of Dr. Tom Fry and Dr. J. Freireich. They were the ones who created this department, and they called it Developmental Therapeutics. And I'll talk about three aspects of this department. First, creation of this department, and it was actually Dr. Arlie Clark, who was the first director or president of MD Anderson Hospital and Tumor Institute, now known as MD Anderson Cancer Center. He was the one he recruited Tom Fry, and Tom Fry then recruited Dr. Freireich. So it will really be a vignette as well as reminiscent about all the legacy of Dr. Freireich, because Dr. Tom Fry was recruited to Sidney Farber, now known as the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So then Dr. Freireich really became the leader of this Developmental Therapeutics unit. He was Promethean, and at the helm of this department, he was able to be creative in literally recruiting who's who in cancer research and oncology. It was one of the biggest departments, and after changing several leaders and names, it has morphed into Department of Experimental Therapeutics. So that's the creation of the department, which he did, that is Dr. Freireich. Then the composition of DT department, and which is also very unique. It was a basic science department, it was a clinical department, rather amalgam of both. It had expertise that represented fundamental science, translational research, clinical research, even statistician. And I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about something that happened almost 6 decades ago. This was an eclectic and elite group of basic and clinical researchers. This conglomeration really was critical and served as a catalyst for the heated debates, and I have watched those debates, discussions, and deliberation for best therapy for specific disease type, and generally that is cancer. It was really a conduit to accelerate the pace of clinical progress. All data and assertions were challenged, and this type of camaraderie, which I had witnessed, that camaraderie and chaos bolstered collaborations and understanding and testing of novel therapeutics, as well as ameliorating untoward toxicity that Dr. Kantarjan mentioned, neutropenia as one example. And there were so many innovative mechanism-based combination strategies that were created by these elite group of scientists and clinical researchers. At the foundation, this resulted in literally evolutionary, like step-by-step incremental increase in clinical outcome. Translational research now is a fashionable term, but at that time, Freireich was the one who implemented. He knew what translational research could do. He was a trailblazer and a pioneer of thinking about bench to bedside research and determination, with the determination to cure cancer. And the third aspect was the concentration of ET department. What was the focus? Or I should say DT department, because at that time it was Developmental Therapeutics department. So one thing that was so unique in the department was that the focus was not on the investigator, it was not on faculty. At the center, at the nucleus, all the time it was patient. And that was such a unique thing, and it really completely tells you that how focused, how determined Dr. Freireich was, because he always was thinking about patient. He believed in doing everything possible for patient. At that time, no one was talking about who will be the first author, who will be the last author in a publication, who will be the PI of the protocol. In fact, every time it was like, what is this project, this protocol, what is it going to do for the clinical outcome of a patient? And that, I think, was something that I learned from him, that to have a satisfaction with life, it's not what we should be thinking about, that where I will be in publication, rather what I'm doing and how it will change patient care, cancer care. Research at that time wasn't driven by impact factor of publication. Instead, it was driven by what is the impact to the patient. In MD Anderson's vision, even now, we have the statement research-driven patient care. And it was Dr. Freireich who really lived that mantra because he changed so much regarding research-driven patient care. It was his aspiration to keep progressing, and it was his inspiration that propelled the team to achieve this aspiration. So in my whole career at MD Anderson, and I saw him when I was a first-year postdoctoral fellow at MD Anderson, and it has put so much of inspiration. And I feel not only he was a teacher, he was a guru, he was a clinical researcher, but he taught us so much more that what MD Anderson is all about and what our focus should be on a daily basis, which is patient and patient care.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. That's truly inspirational. And it sounds like the development and building of the Department of Developmental Therapeutics is something that was really decades ahead of its time at MD Anderson. I think we're fortunate also to have Dr. Rios, who was also a former trainee and mentee of Dr. Freireich in the Department of Developmental Therapeutics. Dr. Rios, do you want to expound upon some of the things that Dr. Gandhi said about Dr. Freireich and his impact on the field?
Thank you. I think that the first thing I would like to say is thank you for the privilege of being in this panel. This is something that I treasure because of my relationship with him. I think that when I look at Dr. Freireich's in terms of a conceptual view of his work, there is one thing that immediately comes to mind. He will always swim against the current. It was almost like a natural instinct on him. The current always needed to be changed, and he will always swim against the current. The other aspect that I believe it was very interesting about his way of thinking is that while he accepts reason, he also not always base his thoughts in a blind acceptance of so-called reason. I take that in quotation. He always challenged what was the thinking of the day, and he was not afraid to go on a different road, or perhaps the proverbial road less traveled. Those were the roads that he really enjoyed. I think he liked to travel the road less traveled. He was not interested in following. He was interested in leading. And I think that one aspect of his leadership is that it was a natural leadership. And I think that's why we follow him, because he wasn't doing things to make himself a leader. He was just, that is who he was. It was a natural leader. And we all, I think, felt that in his presence, and we were inclined to follow him. And finally, I think that there is a personal aspect to Dr. Freireich that I was able to experience that always caught my attention. During the AIDS pandemic, an area that I happened to be involved at his encouragement, Dr. Freireich got to meet your foreman. And what was really interesting to me about their dialogue between George Foreman and Dr. Freireich, two men who have such in the surface, disparate professions, coming from very different backgrounds. You will think that what could these two men have in common? And they have more than meet the eye, because they were both extremely interesting in how to succeed against all odds, how to win, how to make it happen. And I think that the conversations between Dr. Freireich and yours were colored by the desire to fight for a cause, make it happen, not to yield. I mean, their terminology was a terminology of warriors. And that's where I see the commonality between yours and Dr. Freireich. They were two innate born champions, and that's why they got along so well. And they were able to really have a friendship for many decades that translated in philanthropic activities to help the patients, as well as a very deep personal knowledge of each other.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rios, for such powerful words. You described an incredible man that Dr. Freireich was, an innovator, a leader, and a powerful champion for the cause for patients with cancer worldwide. Next, turn to Dr. Este. Dr. Este is another longstanding colleague of Dr. Freireich, who has lots of stories to tell, I'm sure, about their numerous engagements together. But maybe, Dr. Este, can you recount some of the more personal sides of the interactions that you've had with Dr. Freireich over the years?
You know, I just want to say that next to my wife and my parents, no one had a bigger influence on me than Dr. Freireich. He really taught me how to think critically, how to always to be unafraid of challenging accepted wisdom. I have one little episode to share. And this goes back to the early 1980s when the Houston Texans were actually the Houston Oilers. And they played not in Reliance Stadium, but in the Astrodome. And the quarterback was not Deshaun Watson, if he's still there, but Warren Moon. And the coach was not David Culley, but Bum Phillips. So Dr. Freireich was a big sports fan, and he and I went to this Oiler game. And around halftime, he said, "Oh, I'm going to go to the Oiler bench." And, you know, I wasn't sure with him whether he was kidding, but even I assumed that he was. But he walked down, and there was the gate, and there was a security guard. And he just, with total aplomb, just opened the gate and walked through. And I think the security guard was just so amazed at this that he didn't do anything. And Dr. Freireich wandered around the Oiler bench. And I don't know if he said a few words to Bum Phillips or Warren Moon or whoever else was on the team. I don't remember them. But then he came back. And it was just such a bravura performance. And I think that's very emblematic of him. He was really unafraid to break with convention. I think that's just such a tremendous feature of him that really influenced me my whole life. You know, he was not necessarily one for unnecessary kindness, you know, but he just told things the way they were. We would, before, I'm sure Dr. Kantarjian and Dr. Rios remember these things, before the ASH meetings, we would practice our talks if we had a talk, and the talk had to be 10 minutes. And if it wasn't 10 minutes, you would practice it again. And the questions were so, you know, he would always ask the questions, others would too, but the questions were always so penetrating and so, you know, good that it really, really made you think, you know, of what you were doing. And, you know, for that, I'll always be grateful. And he, as you can sort of see by the episode at the Astrodome, he really was a larger than life figure. And I think I'm not the only one who regarded him as a father figure.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Este. He's really, truly a larger than life figure and someone that's prepared many leaders in the field over the decades of his service and mentorship. We're going to turn next to Dr. Vivek Savaya. Dr. Savaya, leads work on the other end of the spectrum, from the translational field in developmental therapeutics to investigational cancer therapeutics, and has been engaged with Dr. Freireich in a number of different ways. And maybe Dr. Savaya, do you want to describe some of those ways that you've been able to engage with him over the course of your career?
Thank you, Dr. Flowers, for the opportunity. And, again, all the faculty before me, Dr. Kantagian, Dr. Rios, Dr. Este, and Dr. Gandhi, described Dr. Freireich's life in the last 50 years. And it's an honor of my lifetime to know and be associated with Dr. Emil J Freireich. And I say that I belong to the grandkid generation, the last 10 years of his life. I first got to know Dr. Freireich as a GME administrative fellow. Dr. Freireich was a chair of the Graduate Medical Education Curriculum Subcommittee. This is a core curriculum lecture series that was his vision. This was for all the fellows at MD Anderson, irrespective of their specialty. Dr. Freireich firmly believed that every fellow, every trainee walking into the halls of MD Anderson should have a core fund of knowledge in oncology that included statistics that should be a part of rigorous education, research, and their scholarly activity. This was not just for hem-onc fellows, but surgical oncology fellows, pathology fellows, pediatric oncology fellows, interventional radiology fellows. I really got to know him well and learned a lot from him behind the podium conversations. This was a lecture series that, as a trainee, we always looked forward for every Monday evening at 5 p.m. This was a lecture series from the who's who of MD Anderson. Every academic year would start with his talk. His would be the first talk on the history of MD Anderson Cancer Center. He used to start the talk about how he came here and how this place was made the best in the universe for oncology research. He was a great actor and a master storyteller. And we also used to look forward to hear it from him every time. This story of MD Anderson Cancer Center, recited by Dr. Freireich, was like wine. It became better over time. In addition, Dr. Freireich used to sit through every presentation with all the fellows. The presentations, as I said, was from the who's who of MD Anderson, from senior faculty members at MD Anderson, and many of them now cancer center directors. As Dr. Este said, the question she always asked was penetrating. He used to criticize all the talks and ask questions. Ironically, I became faculty and I'm currently the chair of the same GME core curriculum subcommittee. We all miss him and his presence in this core curriculum committee. I used to always bump into him in the hallways and talk to him about my work in early phase clinical trials. Anaplastic thyroid cancer is a lethal disease with no FDA approved therapies. The median survival for this was less than 1 year, and in many cases was less than 6 months. A few years ago, we found a rare alteration in this lethal disease and targeted using drugs that were available for melanoma. With just a few patients, the drug combination received an FDA approval and a Journal of Clinical Oncology publication. As my first FDA approval, I was very excited, ran to his office and showed him the paper, the JCO publication, and wanted his autograph on that. His eyes turned bright. He gazed at me, looked at me. He said, "Congrats." He intently glanced through the paper and all the figures, the waterfall plots, and asked, "Have you cured anyone?" I was like, "No, we haven't cured anyone. It's just the tumor shrinkage." So in essence, none. So he said, "You are starting here. In oncology, say we have 300 drugs. Now you have a lot of studies to do with combination therapies to move this field forward." That was Dr. Freireich. he always was looking into the future. His beloved wife was diagnosed with cancer and had undergone all standard lines of therapy. She was not doing well, and her performance status was declining. Dr. Freireich believed in experimental therapies and phase 1 trials. He used to say that he was saved 30 years ago by an experimental cardiac procedure. He was always fascinated by genomic testing and novel therapies, and he used to always come and talk to junior faculty like me. We sequenced her tumor and found her tumor to have high tumor mutational burden and microsatellite instability. Her cancer harbored a lot of mutations, which led us to think, and we started giving her immune checkpoint therapy on an experimental clinical trial. Although the drug is FDA approved now, it was experimental therapy for her disease and for her condition. He championed her and supported the experimental therapy, which ultimately led her from stage 4 diffusely, widely metastatic cancer to a complete response. During the course of this, he used to come to our clinics. He used to call me many Saturday mornings and not just spoke about her care. We spoke about many things: science, research, politics, climate change, his worldview, some of them very controversial. His mind was always sharp and his intellect intact. As you all know, Dr. Freireich was profiled in Malcolm Gladwell's David and the Goliath, the book for underdogs, misfits, and the art of battling giants, and also Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee's The Emperor of All Maladies. I read those books and I learned a lot about Dr. Freireich from those books, and I used to ask him questions. He asked me many times how this CRISPR technology worked, how immunotherapies worked. And specifically, he asked me several times about how immunotherapies worked in patients with a lot of mutations. I gave him and sent him a paper from Science from Bert Vogelstein. He read it and asked me to read it as well. We spoke several times, and he said, bottom line is, we really don't know why it works, but it works. Okay. He firmly believed in hope. We all live our lives in the future. We base most of our decisions on experiences of the past, but we have limited ability to envision the potential for major changes in the future. Dr. Freireich has been a physician, a luminary, a trailblazer involved in caring for cancer patients with diagnosis of terminal illnesses for more than 50 years, and has personally cared for hundreds of patients who have had dramatic, life-altering benefits from investigational therapies. It was a true distinction and honor of my lifetime to earn his trust, that he trusted a junior faculty for the care of his beloved wife of more than 50 years. As Dr. Kantarjian said, 2 characteristics defined him throughout his life: eternal optimism and defiance of established norms. He lived by this for him and his family. I loved him like my grandfather. He definitely inspired me to personally go above and beyond and challenge standard of care. I dedicate all the practice-changing trials and FDA approvals to his inspiration. We all miss listening to his golden voice. I used to tell him that he would have given a stiff competition to James Earl Jones if he entered show business for his amazing resonant voice. We will all miss him dearly. I think he is looking and blessing all of us from up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Savaya. Thank you to all the members of our panel for your eloquent and really inspiring descriptions of Dr. Freireich and all of his contributions to the field. A mentor, a leader, truly inspirational man who has really changed the world of cancer medicine. Just to sum up things, I'm going to turn things back to Dr. Kantarjian to make some final comments about the great impact that Dr. Freireich has had.
I think we alluded quite a bit to many of his characteristics, but one of them is his mentorship. One thing that has not been mentioned is in 1966, when Freireich came to MD Anderson, he started the Hematology-Oncology Fellowship. And this was before this discipline was an established discipline. I remember in 1978 talking to my father about becoming a cancer specialist. He told me there's no such specialty. He looked around and there are no cancer experts and there's no such cancer discipline. In 1966, Freireich started training the new fellows into what became later an established discipline of hematology-oncology. And he trained hundreds, if not thousands of people who not only stayed at MD Anderson, but many of them went back to their countries, established new cancer centers, developed their own legacies, and cured hundreds of thousands of people. So the impact of Freireich in cancer and research is not unique to MD Anderson or to the United States. He has trained the world leaders in cancer research, and they, on their own, upgraded the level of cancer care and research in many countries across the universe. And for that, we'll always be very grateful.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to mention, we talked so much about the clinical fellows education and Dr. Freireich's role. I would also like to mention that he was also interested in the basic research, and actually with Rizal Kurzrock, they developed a new program. It is called the Small P, or a track program, and that is established in the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. And that program was for PhD students for their education in translational research, and that track still exists. It's under now cancer biology. So he was truly like visionary to think about new aspects. And many of us mention about that, how he was a truly optimistic person. And he always used to say that humans cannot live without hope.
I would say that the comment about the optimism of Dr. Freireich was what I wanted to say is that he was able to transmit that optimism to the listener or to the person that was in front of him. It's not that you just see him as being a person of unusual optimism. He will transmit that to you. And I remember very vividly one time that I was talking to him in his office, and we were talking about some future endeavors that I wanted to get engaged, and I was having some trepidation about it. And suddenly he said, let's switch chairs. And so we changed chairs, and now I was able to look through his window on the 6th floor, a brief slice of the sky of Texas. And I asked him, I said, well, why are we changing chairs? And he looked at me, and with very, I could feel that he was looking at me. That's another property that I think he has as a human being. He said, well, I want you to see the sky of Texas. Everything is possible. And he meant it. I knew he meant it. I knew that this was not a pep talk. This was just the man telling me, look, this is possible. Don't be afraid. And that motivation, I think that we all in one way or another experience from him, is what he transmits to his patients and to his environment. So
he would always use the phrase "prepared for success," and I think that's like you said, that it gives people optimism when oftentimes there is none. Prepared for success. I'll never forget that.
Well, I greatly appreciate all of the contributions of all of our panelists. You've really nicely highlighted many great stories that are quite compelling and really give us a full character of an amazing man who made tremendous contributions to the field of cancer medicine and lived a wonderful life, the great life of Emil J Freireich. Thank you all for joining us today.
As Chief Medical Executive at MD Anderson, I'm inspired daily by our collective commitment to making cancer history for our patients and for patients around the world. Today's program has shown us all the indelible mark that Dr. Freireich has left on the field of oncology. Dr. Freireich was one of those unique individuals whose legacy changed the course of cancer care forever. And for that, we forever will be grateful. The list of Dr. Freireich's achievements is endless, but I want to highlight two of his highest honors. The American Association for Cancer Research recognized Dr. Freireich with the 2019 AACR Award for Lifetime Achievement in Cancer Research. This particular award was established in 2004 to honor individuals who have made a significant fundamental contribution to cancer research, either through a single scientific discovery or a collective body of work. Dr. Freireich considered this one of the greatest honors he ever received. I also want to highlight that ASCO recently awarded Dr. Freireich the Distinguished Achievement Award. Dr. Freireich was selected posthumously to receive this award for his groundbreaking work in developing innovative therapies for childhood leukemia and as a trailblazing scientist and mentor. Before we close, the Freireich family has an endowment established for the leukemia department at MD Anderson. If you would like to donate in memory of Dr. Freireich, please visit the link at the bottom of your screen. Thank you for joining us.